So glad you're here. If you're new, good for you. You're starting a brand new study. We mastered the Trinity. That's good news.
One God in three persons.
There you go.
Trinity,
Well,
that's all I know.
I scared off some people I know 2 weeks ago. But really, though, if someone were to ask you on the streets, what do Christians... No, I always did say it wrong. What does Christianity teach about this Trinity stuff? Explain that to me. Try me.
Depends where you are at, because some of them don't say the same thing, it seems like.
Yeah, but mostly Orthodox Christianity has taught the same thing since the 4th century. And they would say,
Son, Holy Spirit.
yeah, so God is...
One God with three persons.
Yeah, so one being, one God means the same thing. A being is the whole composite of all the characteristics. One being and three persons or centers of consciousness. You say, what do you mean by person? A center of consciousness. Now, this is not the only way to explain it or understand it, but it's the way I present. I think it's the most compelling, and that's the one we learn. If you want to learn more, go read it. One being, three persons. One being, three centers of consciousness. So Father, Son, and Spirit are all God, but they're not the same persons. So when Jesus prays to God, he's praying to God the Father. In the Bible, when it says God, it almost always means God the Father. Almost always. Jesus means Jesus, and the Spirit or Holy Spirit means, of course, the Holy Spirit. Good. All right, well, that was the big conclusion. So what? I have those handouts from last time. They're over here. If you want those handouts for the Trinity, from the books I recommended, you can still borrow those and check them out if you want. They're over there. Otherwise, we're moving ahead to something different, something quite different, in fact. And so what I thought we'd do after last week, when we discussed several different options, I really prayed and thought about it. For some reason, I thought, let's do this one. So maybe I'm delusional, but this one I chose. I was thinking of something like morality, God, and Christianity. Or morality and Christianity, morality and God, however you will look at it. Here's what I'm thinking, and I'll tell you what I'm very scared of. What I'm thinking is, in the next, say, 6 to 8 weeks, however long it takes us to about early mid-December, so 6 to 8 weeks, we could do this for at least that long. What I was thinking was that we'd start out pretty abstract on thinking about what morality is. Then we spend some time talking about how morality relates to God a little more. That'd be pretty brief. And then how morality relates to Christianity. And then at the very end, bring up some ethical issues brought up in the New Testament, like women should cover their hair. Women should not longer teach in church. What about sins? What's the nature of morality in the biblical text? That's the 3 stages where I'm heading. Big abstract down to real practical relevant for the Christian life. What makes me scared is several things, while I'm up here confessing, just me and the world on the internet, is I've never taught this class at a church. I've only taught it when it was straight up lecture and I had 3 or 4 months to teach it. So I've never done it this way. And that's one thing which means I'm not sure how to do this in a way that tries to keep you all engaged. Which leads to my second point. I'm real scared I'm going to scare you all off tonight because it's the most abstract. And not everyone thinks abstractly. And if you can, not everyone wants to think abstractly. They want to talk about how to build things or use their hands or concrete objects. And another people, this is also very common in church, is you don't like talking about abstract. Most people want to talk about how does this help me in the daily life out there live like Jesus. And so it just ticks them off, makes them frustrated. Well, how does this help me be like Jesus? And they get mad about it. And they do that about Trinity. They do it about everything else that we talk about, and the vast subject of God. They usually get these kind of people get very frustrated if it doesn't help me leave this room learning how to read my Bible or be a quote-unquote good person. Well, to you, I'm concerned, if you're that kind of person, especially online, listening to the podcast, my concern is I'll lose you immediately. To those, I'd say hopefully is maybe you can stick around toward the end of the study where I get a lot more practical. So I'm just being honest with you. I've not taught this in church before. I'm concerned I'm going to lose you if you don't like abstract things. And I'm concerned I'm going to lose you if you say I only really care if this isn't directly related to how I can use it in my life when I walk out the door. So that's my struggle. And so what I've done is I've worked since Monday, I don't know, at least 40, 50 hours on my handouts. So far, what you have is the first part. It's not everything. It's the first big chunk. And I know how much to give and not to give. So what I was thinking about doing is, first I'll hear your feedback because I don't want to waste my time and waste your time, and I don't want you to not come back and study. I'll just wait a month, and then I'll talk about the Bible. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just skip straight to the Bible. That's all you want to talk about. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about the abstract first, but that's what I'm thinking. So talk to me real quickly, and we'll move on. I can move on pretty quickly. So what are your thoughts about my three-stage prong, and does it interest you at all, and the way I've described it?
I'm in it for the duration.
You're in it. In it to win it.
Me too.
You're in it, so two people. Good.
I'd like to hear what you have to say about all this stuff, and we can be patient and get to the application later.
Help us work on our patience.
Okay. Helps you work on your patience.
Another thing, a lot of people say that they're so intelligent they don't believe all this Christianity stuff. Well, let me hear some of this nerdy stuff in the background, so maybe I can challenge them.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the nerdy stuff and people who don't believe, really, because if somewhere that I don't know how much time to spend, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is for that reason. Is what I mean is, I talk a lot with skeptics and atheists, and when you bring up morality, which you should bring up, it's a really important topic, they will usually rightfully fuss about two major things. What morality is and why you think it comes from God. And then your morality in the Bible is horrible. Have you read it before? Slaughter the Canaanites and whatever. And these two major facets I face all the time. And those are rightful issues to bring up, rightful questions to ask. And they deserve to have some answers. And so that's what I'm trying to do in this study, basically, is to say, let's talk about the morality part, let's talk about the Bible part, and that's basically it. But I was kind of, that's kind of where I'm headed. But not everyone's in that world, not everyone talks to those nerdy type, and you might go, well, who gives a rip? But anyway, any other thoughts, questions, comments? You go stick around a little bit? Okay, we'll see. Okay, I'll do the best job I can on being as short as I can on these things, and if you ask me questions or go further, I'll do my best to go there, if that makes sense. So I will always try to keep it pretty brief, unless you want me to pause, if that makes sense. When I get to the biblical stuff, I don't care what you think, I'll just kidding. I'll go slower. That's okay, so you should have a handout in front of you, you should have 3 pieces of paper, and you should have a pen and so forth. This first part is abstract. Now, who cares? Well, for centuries, ever since Plato and Aristotle, humans have asked this question. We have this sense of, and we even talk about the good, what is right, but what is it? What is it? How do we know it? Why choose that action over that action? It's been reflected on forever. It's a basis of Western, well, the earth. I mean, even the Asians did it with Confucius. I mean, humans want to think about this. And so on the broadest level, there's an enormous amount of literature on this. And so I've tried my best to nail it. And any ethicist would hear this, I think, and be pleased, but then go, you missed this. Yeah. So how do we do this without spending 4 years on it? But so what I'm going to do is I will outline the best I can broadly, number one. Now, here's the deal. I got 10 pages of typed notes, and I gave you 3. So if you want to take close notes, you're going to need another piece of paper, if that makes sense. Or flip it over. That's why I didn't do double-sided. It's up to you. You can just listen and write nothing. It's up to you, whatever. And I'll do my best to write stuff on the board as well. The first question is that fun? Okay, number one, what is morality? In philosophy, we call this meta-ethics. Meta-ethics. I introduce these terms sometimes, particularly, as Vanna said, for the nerdy type, because sometimes, every once in a while, depending on with whom you're speaking, you'll hear this vocabulary. I personally don't care if you can leave this room and go, I can learn that's deontological, whatever. But I'm going to introduce you to terms. That's what we do. Metaethics is abstract. It involves, it's an investigation on how moral terms are used and how they fit together in moral sentences. How the terms are used and how they work in a sentence, in a statement. It's a very abstract thing, and if you don't like that, well, anyway, it is. So metaethics is a broad category that involves how to think about morality and what moral words mean in a sentence. If I said it is right to save the baby, what does it mean right? Or it's good and so forth. That's what makes it difficult. So if you don't mind helping out with the handouts and samples if you want to. So that's what metaethics means in general. And in general, okay, that's the first thing. That's what metaethics means. Come on in. Come on in. David, that's your... Sweet. I'll pause for a second as y'all can adjust it.
What is this, a test? Pop quiz?
Pop quiz. It's a pre-test. No, I won't repeat my whole spiel. I spent 10 minutes talking about how this tonight is going to scare a lot of people off, but please don't be scared off. I want to talk about morality and God, and we're going to get more and more, quote-unquote, practical as the weeks go by. So if you'll stay in there, I think it will pay off later on. So first thing is, morality and metaphysics is how we talk about ethical things and sentences. Philosophers have given several things that make something a moral issue. And there's 4 biggies that most philosophers concur. These are necessary or sufficient conditions for defining morality. How do I know if something is moral? How do I know that? And we'll talk more about that. One is if it's supremely authoritative. That is, it's an overriding guide of conduct, attitude, or motive. It's above, it's a moral issue, it's about morality, if it's above etiquette, above custom, above law. It's supremely authoritative. Supremely authoritative. A judgment is moral if it is prescriptive. A judgment is moral if it is prescriptive. Prescriptive means, of course, of an attitude or motive or whatever, which means it tells me what I ought to do. And I'll talk about that a lot as time goes on. Ought to do. Think very carefully and simply, when I go to the doctor and he or she gives me a prescription, it means I should take this medicine. Prescription doesn't mean medication. A prescription means a shouldness, an oughtness, an order, a commandment. If I were you, you should go take this to make that better. That's what morality, most philosophers say, is supremely authoritative, and it is prescriptive, not descriptive, but something you ought or should do. Now let me say something real quickly about that, if I can stay with me here. This kind of ought is not the same as an aesthetic ought. I might tell my child, if you want the picture to look more beautiful, you ought to draw it blank. You ought to use more colors. You ought to use more blank. I can use the word ought. You should draw it this way. It'll look more pretty. That's an aesthetic ought. We use it all the time. That's not the same as a prescriptive morality. I can also use the word ought or should when it comes to logic or mathematics or any other way. So for example, I might say, you ought to believe me based on the evidence. That's not a moral ought, that's a logical ought. Ought. So Cassidy says, you ought to use these particular nails when you put the roof on. Well, that's a logical ought, a scientific ought in that sense. It's not a moral prescriptive ought. So when philosophers use it this way, morality is a prescription that's a very specific kind of prescription, pertaining about behavior and so attitudes or motives. But nevertheless, it's not descriptive. Here's the way it is, but the way you should do it. And ethical is something different. A judgment is moral only if it's universalizable. That is, it applies all the time. So let me, I'll use equally or universally applies, given a similar situation. So a certain act of lying may be the only way to save a life. That's different. But if everything, absent relevant features, all acts of lying are wrong. They're just wrong. That is, it equally applies whether I'm Asian, Mexican, white, rich, poor. It's just wrong. Now, the actual circumstance might change things. We'll talk a lot about that later. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure you understand most philosophers think something is moral is if it's not some really simple conditional thing, but that in general it's universal. That around the globe, most people will consider it, yeah, that's wrong or that's right. The fourth thing and final thing is this. Most people say it's a judgment is moral only if it makes reference to proper human flourishing, human dignity, the welfare of others, the prevention of harm, provision of benefit. That is, in general, humans flourish. Humans flourish. And that's key because most philosophers, not all, I always say that qualitative, most philosophers concur that morality has to do with humans. For example, I'll say it this way. At home, we have a new puppy. He's now almost 3 or 4 months old, whatever it is, whenever we went to the place out to the festival. And we put down 2 bowls of food. So down one for him, one for Lego, and for Bear and Lego. And then if Bear goes and takes Lego's food, he didn't steal it. He didn't steal the food. He's a dog. His instinct, he smells it, it's time to eat. And his instinct tells him, eat all that's in front of me and block Lego, so it's more for me. I'm sure it's his instinct just tells him. Well, that's not ethical. I don't think he stole it. I go, what, a thief? Bear's a thief? Who knew? No one does that. All right? If a lion eats a gazelle, that lion's a murderer. That doesn't work in the animal kingdom. That is, most philosophers forever said it doesn't count. The animal kingdom is not regulated by the moral law. It's about human flourishing. Now, what it means to flourish, that's very much debated. I think it goes all the way back to Aristotle. So these are 4 features that most philosophers say, this is how we roll when it comes to morality. A judgment is moral if it's extremely authoritative. It surpasses all customs and laws. It's prescriptive, not descriptive. It's universal or equally applies in general, all people at all times. And it's about primarily humans, not other animals. So to say it in a summary, like Bill Craig says it, for the most part, morality is supremely authoritative, prescriptive, universalizable, and makes reference to human dignity, welfare, and flourishing. Okay, let me pause there for a second. Any questions or comments about that?
Is the number 4, is it individual or humans?
Good. Is it individual or humans? In this regard, the answer is yes. But in general, they're going to talk about it in general, like the universality. That is, universally or equally applies to all people. Here would be in general to all humans at all time. And so, that's the short answer.
Thank you.
So if I had to choose between an action if 2 equal behaviors, again, back to analogy, if I see Bear take Lego's food, and I take your food, I've stolen. My dog has not. Because it applies to humans. Now, I'm an individual human, but in that instance, because I'm a human, because you're a human, I've done something wrong, bad, immoral, but my dogs have not.
Well, to go along with that one, if someone is starving, and you have you are well fed, and you have a full plate of food that you are not going to eat, is it not moral for the person that is starving to eat?
Great question. You just repeated, I think. Well, basically, short answer before I repeat the whole thing, because I'm gonna delay my answer. Tom gave a question of what's called a moral dilemma. And a moral dilemma, is it moral or not? If you've got a lot of food and you don't give it, or someone takes it, you've got plenty and so forth. That moral dilemma, that depends on the particular system of ethics to which you appeal. And we're going to talk about that on Roman numeral. We got a while to get to that one. We're going to get down to Roman numeral 5, various systems of ethics under moral philosophy. And we will explore all kinds of moral quandaries. And it depends on the system to which you appeal, depends on how you answer the question. And I will tell you exactly what I think about that when we get there, if that's okay. I just don't want to get ahead of there. This is a great question, because there are all kinds of things. That moral quandaries, is it okay to beat someone if they were blocking you and your family from surviving, and they were blocking the medicine you needed? Can I slap them? Can I beat them? Can I hurt them? Can I kill them? Can I kill 10 people if it saved 20 people? And so those kinds of issues we're going to talk about, depending on the system of ethics, how we understand that. And all that does lead to the Bible, because we're going to get some real specific biblical examples and how that fits into Christian morality. I'll move ahead. Anything else? Okay. Letter C. Is that right? You got letter C there? Descriptive. Descriptive versus...
It's letter A or not.
okay.
C is real.
Okay, good. See, that's good to know that. That's exactly why when I deleted it, changed it. Okay, good. Letter A, descriptive fact versus descriptive. On that point, I'm trying to make sure we get this very distinct in vocabulary. Descriptive is a fact, prescriptive is a not. In general, a fact or factual belief involves a description about the way the world is. Empirically, that's scientifically or metaphysically or religiously. It's just a fact. about the way it is. I'll keep using Cassidy because I know he works all day working construction and roofs. He said it's just a fact that this roof is made of tin. It just is, just the way it is. It's a fact that I'm standing here. And you can make, that's empirical evidence. I can touch it, I can take it to the lab, I can test its composition or whatever, it's just a fact. But in contrast, a value or a value belief involves the adherence to some moral proposition that prescribes what morally ought to be. So an ought statement, one more time, makes a prescription. So these kind of statements are like rape is wrong, rape is morally permissible, or one should not rape. These are moral prescriptions, not the way, just a mere description. I'm going to come back that a little bit, but in general, when I will use those terms to save time throughout the whole study, instead of viewing either 5 different views or 10 views, I will give you a few biggies and then tell you what my view is, just because I'm a teacher, I guess, in that sense. But you can disagree. But in general, I will assume this view, that there's a difference between the fact versus the prescription, what ought to be. There's a diagnosis the doctor gives me, then there's a prescription of what I should take to change it. Those are two different things. And in morality, most philosophers concur on those two definitions. Most do. Letter B. We make a distinction in metaethics of cognitivism versus emotivism, or anti-cognitivism. To what do moral statements refer? Now I'm going to move on. Just stay with me for a second, because this is a gargantuan topic, and I just want to introduce you to it. When the philosophers like to talk about morality, they like to analyze everything about everything. And in this issue, they debate to what do moral statements refer. That is, in a sentence, it is wrong to rape. How is wrong? What does wrong mean in that sentence? And does this, how does the sentence itself work? How does it work? So, the cognitivism view is that moral statements express true beliefs about the world. It really is talking about something in the world of reality. That's cognitivism. I wish it was called something else, but that's what it's called. So, the metaethical view that moral statements express true beliefs about the world is cognitivism. I'm a cognitivist. That's my view. Non-cognitivism, like David Hume was a big guy, a philosopher, he introduced the opposite. And a specific example of that is A.J. Ayer. Ayer was a well-known atheist philosopher in the 30s and 40s. Rare, he's dead now. He had something called metaethical emotivism. And now listen to this. He said that moral sentences always talk about a speaker's own affective state. So when someone says abortion is morally wrong, it really just means I don't approve of abortion. Say it one more time. So when someone says abortion is morally wrong, he says what they really, really mean in that moral sentence is, I don't approve of it. Not that it is wrong like a fact of the universe, a fact of reality. I'm really when I say it, I sound like I'm talking about something in reality, but really I'm just giving you my psychological state. Does that make sense? And that's the difference between cognitivism says, no, I'm really talking about something in reality. Emotivism or anti says, no, you really just mean it's an emotional state you have. That sentence doesn't really mean, it means something. It doesn't mean anything about reality, though. I hate torture. Torture's wrong. That just means you don't prefer it. That's what they would say. And I would say, no, torture's wrong. I'm not just saying I don't prefer it. I think it's wrong. And I don't like it, and I don't prefer it, and I hate it. But it's also wrong. I don't prefer it because it's wrong. And they say, no, those are, you can't do that. You're just talking about your emotional state, your psychological state. And I don't find that compelling. But a lot of people write that way. So that's one distinction. Historically, most Christians are more the cognitivist. When we think we're talking about something ethical, we think something really is wrong in the world. If I say someone raped someone, I go, that was wrong to rape them. I really think I'm talking about something in reality. I'm not just saying, well, I don't prefer rape. I don't think that's what I mean at all. I think it's wrong. And they would disagree with me, that's fine. And that's different. When you look in the sentence itself and then start talking about the values, to what do moral values refer? Well, realist or objectivist assert that moral values are real and objective. Listen to what I mean by objective and real. This is debated all the time. Little footnote, if you ever talk to well, quite frankly, most atheists with whom I've heard debates and had conversations, not all, this is where they'll really get, this word real or objective is a catchy word, and it should be a tricky word. I mean, some you define. Objective means it exists independently. It exists independently of anybody's beliefs or evidence about them. Like geometrical or mathematical properties might be thought to be objective. 2 + 2 = 4. It's real. It's objective. And I'm a realist, or an objectivist, I don't care what you call it, but I'm a realist. I think I'm saying something that is objective and real. I think honor is a good thing. It's a real thing. It's a real objective thing. Objective means it's true whether I believe it or not. For example, I think 2 + 2 = 4 before I believed it. It was already 4. When I learned how to do mathematics of a triangle and learn 90 degrees, it was always true. They taught me about it, but I go, no, I get it, it's true. I discovered it, but it was always true. It's real, it's a fact. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? A subjectivist, the opposite, the relativist, they say, nope, there are no such thing as a belief independent facts. And then the subjectivist is going to say, oh, let me ask you this, David, as a realist, what makes it objective? If it's independent of you, what makes it objective? Is it out there in the universe? Is it past Jupiter somewhere, and you say, oh, it's out there, or is it something on Earth, and you're talking about a thing? Well, I say that's brown because I'm looking at something that's brown, so that's a property. But yeah, I'm looking at a brown piece of wood. But what does it look like, David, for justice? What does justice look like? And I would say, no, it doesn't look like something. So people who hold a realist view like I do, they have to give the answer to what makes it objective. And they always have one of two reasons, one of two sources. And I'll talk a lot more about this later on, but to go that way now, what makes it objective? I don't think it's a piece of wood. I don't think I can see it. But then in what way is it real if I don't see it or test it or whatever? It either has to go back to some kind of absolute standard, some absolute transcendent standard, or to use my term, and everyone's term, God, or it exists, as Plato said, and that's why we call this Platonism. And that is things like justice and truth and beauty and love. These things really are real things, abstract objects floating in reality. Not so much floating in space, but they're just out there independently on their own. And there are Platonists in the world. Plato argued this, and today there are more philosophers of Platonists. I don't find Platonism convincing, and I'll go there later on. But all that to say, I do think it's objective. Just because I think it's objective doesn't mean I have to have a thing that I'm describing a property. But I do think I'm talking about something that's real or objective. And to me, the same analogy is with mathematics. I think 2 + 2 = 4 is real and objective, regardless if I'm Asian, African, from Antarctica. It's just the way it is. Just like with moral values, the analogy that people use all the time in philosophy. If Hitler had won the war and had killed all the Jews and kept killing and just committed complete genocide and it worked, and he won, and Germany and the new Reich ruled forever, and it's still a government. As a realist, I would say it's still wrong that you committed genocide. What if that the Nazis convinced all humans it was good to do this? It would still be wrong that they committed genocide. Their overwhelming belief, in my opinion, was I would say, it's just still wrong. I don't need them to believe it for it to be wrong. Because it's real, it's objective. It's beyond human, it's just beyond it. And some of these analogies I might have to use more than once, so bear with me, maybe that'll help though. For example, to use World War II. At the Nuremberg trials, when they were trying the Nazi leaders who were left over, the primary area of defense that they used over and over and over, the German lawyers did for the German soldiers, the commanders and so forth, was, of course, they were just following orders. And so they were being loyal and having integrity and so forth. They were being honorable by doing exactly what their commanding officers told them to do. What do you expect from me? I couldn't just disobey them. I'm in the military and so forth. We obeyed the law as we understood it. And in general, of course, the response back to that is there's a law above the law. There's a moral law above the law of your commanding officer in the military, and above your own culture, and above your own government, and you broke it. And that's how they got condemned. Well, today, with relativism and subjectivist, that was, quite frankly, they say that's stupid. There's no such thing as a law above that. That Hitler and the Nazis were perfectly okay to do this, because from their perspective, from their person dependent, they were fine with doing that. It was true to them. It was good for them. It was right to them to do it. And if you haven't seen this already, if you ever met a relativist, I've never met a real good relativist. I have people who talk like they're relativists. But that's just silly. But the way to test that is to find something they really care about, and then say you did something horrible about it and watch the face turn red.
Yeah.
Versus going, they don't go, well, that's your view. They get mad, or talk about it. Isn't it so good the people can't marry whoever they want to marry? Isn't it good we just lock down that marriage, man and woman, or whatever? Instead of them going, you can have your you and I have mine, it makes them mad, it's unjust, it's not right. They're not relativists. But most relativists will talk that way and act that way because what they really want is not you to judge them, to tell them they're wrong. But nevertheless, they do try to act that way. But so they would say, to what do moral values refer? They would say a personal, person-dependent view of something. And I'm not that way. I'm a realist. I think that moral values are objective, not subjective. You might be thinking, David, what about all the differences in the world? We're going to talk about the differences in moral. We're going to talk about that. In fact, just a second. So, metaethical realism, and that's letters B and C. B and C are different because B is about moral statements about things, sentences. C is about the values themselves. I believe in justice. I think justice is right. I'm an idealist. It's objectively right. If I'm Asian, Chinese, what does it matter? It's right. I'm a realist. Subjectivist says, no, there's no such thing as objective right. You think it's right, good for you. Pat me on the head. And you think that because it's either evolution or culture or whatever, we'll talk about that. Okay, this last thing, and then I'll pause, morality. I brought this in there because in my mind, this is one of the most confused parts about moral discussion amongst Christians and atheists that I've ever had. So I want to put it up early on in the discussion because at some point you're going to ask me, or be back in your mind being confused or whatever it is. There's a difference between morality and social etiquette and law. And I hear this, being kind about it, this is confused, blurred all the time amongst well-intentioned Christians. So, just in brief, I'll say morality is assuming there's some moral values, what I ought to do, prescription. Social etiquette is about how I express those moral values. And those are not the same. In every time I've ever heard a person, particularly non-believers, but even Christians, say, everyone's different. Look around the world. Look at Asians versus Americans. Everyone's got radically different views on things. They have radically different behavior. And then I ask them for examples. And every time, in my experience, they don't give me one difference in a moral value. They give me tons of differences in what we call social etiquette. So, for example, if I meet a person for the first time, what's the first thing probably I'm going to do as a guy? Shake their hand. Why am I shaking the hand?
To show you don't have a weapon.
To show I don't have a weapon. That's exactly why. Where are you from? The streets?
No, but in
The origin, yeah, I hear you. No, that's true, yeah. And then there's like tipping your hat, whatever. But no, why today? Why would a human? You might say, well, my mom and dad taught me that. But let's assume I do it for a reason. I do it for a moral value. And I would argue most people do it for a moral value. Because it demonstrates what?
trust.
Friendliness, respect, maybe to some degree of trust, and I might use the word honor. I'm showing honor and respect to the person. That's a moral value. Respect, honor, maybe trust. These are moral values. I'm expressing it because in this culture, it's social etiquette to express honor that way. How do the Japanese do it? They bow. Those are radically different. No, what are they doing? They're expressing honor, trust, friendship, safety, all those things different ways. What about if I'm British? If I'm British, I might do what? Tip your hat. Or if I greet a person, they typically do what? Kiss on each cheek. Unless you're in Hollywood in America, that's the only ones who do it there. But most people in America don't do that. But British do. But they're doing the same thing. And over and over and over again, when I meet people just confused, if you think for a second about what you see as different behavior, beneath it is a moral value, and you go, oh, I agree with that completely. You might think this is, and you bring up some crazy example about it was in New Guinea, somewhere it was now, where they exposed the elderly to die. Well, they did research on that and realized it's because the elderly wish for it, it's an honorable death, and on it went. Well, those are valuable things. And I go, well, I agree with every one of those valuable things. C.S. Lewis, and then I was going to put another one, social ethic versus fact. And I should have done that maybe too. C.S. Lewis gives an analogy of the witch trials. See, we've evolved so much. They used to kill witches. He said, well, wait a second. If our culture really thought there really were people who sold their souls to Satan and could at moment's word or cast a spell in a prison cell kill anybody they wanted, wouldn't the right thing be to do to end their lives to save all the people they were going to kill? Isn't it morally right to end their lives to save hundreds or thousands of people? The answer is, yeah, it is. Well, we don't believe in the fact that witches can do that, so we don't do that anymore. But if we thought that, we'd do it. That'd be on the books, guarantee it, Constitution. Found another one, wrap them up. They are a danger to society. We lock up in the deepest dark parts of a prison pedophiles as if they're like a witch, or the murderers, or the death row. We get the worst of the worst because we think they're a danger to society. So our facts are different, but we have the same value as they did. Another big distinction is versus the law. The law oftentimes legislates morality, yes, but not everything that's illegal is immoral. It's not. It is not a moral issue upon which side of the road you drive. We drive on the right, British drive on the left. Who gives a rip? It's not a moral issue. But it's illegal if I go through and drive on the left side of the road. Right side of the road. Yeah, right side. And dangerous. Well, Dave, it's dangerous, but it's illegal. I don't get a ticket. And I get a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. That's the dumbest thing. That's crazy, sorry. I don't get a ticket for not brushing my teeth at night. But anyway, I understand that people are driving over the speed limit. Well, they shouldn't do that and so forth. But the should part is not moral, it's just law. And most of the time, Christians I've heard say, well, we shouldn't do that. If it's a moral issue, and all of a sudden I bring out the law and say, well, it's illegal anyway. And the real danger, there's two big problems with that. One is, the law does not dictate what is moral. It does not. You won't find, I don't know if any major Christian philosopher at all is going to concur with that statement. They're not the same thing. You might establish laws based on moral principles. That is true. But not every law is based off of a principle of morality. Maybe a principle of safety. More people will survive more if they don't drive over a certain speed limit. Great, that's helping our survival and so forth. But they're not the same thing. The second major danger, not only is it, I would argue, nonsense to believe that ethics equals law. The second and the real danger is, and I see this in reality every day on the job, basically, and that is Christians can, well, to put it bluntly, oftentimes hide behind the law. Instead of making a moral decision, you say, well, it's illegal. But as soon as it becomes legal, all of a sudden, is it moral or not? All of a sudden, it's up in the air. And so as the government goes back and forth with different decisions on all kinds of stuff, abortion, marriage, whatever the issue is, when Christians just, whatever they decide, well, it's the government, it must be whatever it is, well, it's legal, it's fine. I'm going to suggest in probably a few weeks as we really unpack the Christian worldview, I do not think for a second Christians should be following on the tails of the government as it weaves in and out of various legal decisions. Let them make their law decisions. We hope they are just. We hope they're honorable. We hope they support Christian values. But we don't determine what is moral based on what they determine as law. They're not the same thing. They've never been in the history of Christianity. Though, I'll say it one more time, I'm trying to be as clear as I can, the government often tries to legislate moral issues. They will form laws based on values. And that's fine. And Christians, I would argue, should be in the midst of trying to help form their values so they make laws based off of righteous values. I think we should be in that game. But that's not to say that every law, therefore, is the moral thing to do. If the government told us to go kill people for no justifiable right, we don't like people in Kansas, and so we need to join the army to go kill them. We say, I don't care. It's the law. You'll be arrested if you don't go kill the Kansans. I don't care. It's not a law to go enslave people again. It all came back. I don't care. Sign me up. I'm going to jail. I'm not going to sign up. I'm going to do it. Well, I'll conscript you, but I'm running. I'm not going to do it. It's the law, David. You got to obey it. Now you bring up Romans 13 about Paul saying obey authority. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that. So morality is not the same as social etiquette. It's not the same as law. By the way, a little nerd talk. This is kind of fun. Think about all the things you do in social etiquette along the way, and think about why you do it. You might do it only because you were taught. I got it. So I say sir and ma'am. I still do. I was raised from the South. My parents, you said it. And so it was ingrained in me. Why do we say that? And my mom and dad would say, because what? Respect. Sign of respect. That's a moral value. Well, I agree that respect is a moral value. And I'm fine that in the social etiquette rules, that counts. If they said, well, you slap them, I think that sounds kind of funny. Or why would I do that? No, I say sir or ma'am. If that's all it takes to show respect, I'll do it. And so now when someone doesn't do it to me, like my own children, guess what I feel or hear inside? You don't respect. It's disrespectful. Well, it doesn't mean they disrespect me. It means they're not expressing respect that way. Do you see the difference? And the older generation, I won't look at anybody over here on the left side, but Tom and others, older, not really, seriously, the older generation, if you didn't say it, you were being disrespectful, because in their mind, the only or one of the main ways you showed respect was you had to say sir or ma'am. Kids didn't talk unless you were talked to. You didn't sit at the table with them and so forth. But again, the social etiquette has changed over time. What women can wear. They're trying to show the value of what? Modesty. But what is considered modesty is radically different depending on the culture you're in. Radically different. Okay, but they're all trying to demonstrate modesty, which is a moral value. Cultures can decide what counts to express it. But it's interesting to think about your own life when you go and you have all kinds of social etiquette. If you do you stand up when a female comes in the room or sit down? I almost always open my wife's door of the car and the truck. Almost always. Outside of certain times, there's all kinds of things I do. But what's happened when I studied this years ago, it changed my life because I realized I want everything I do, if I can, be based on moral value, so that I know why I'm doing it. And if I'm not going to express it that way, how else am I going to express it? I mean, find some other way that would express to the person. I honor, I cherish them, I whatever. All kinds of things. Like when someone talks, I try my best. I mean, I'm imperfect. I try my best never to interrupt them. And why do I do that? Because I think I'm trying to show them what? Respect. I care about what's coming out of your mouth, and I want to listen to it. I look in the eyes. That's why I look in the eyes. I'm trying to show respect. I care so much about what you're saying. In fact, it's very personally, David time, it's very difficult for me to process information, what I want to say, while I'm looking in the eyes. Because when I look in the eyes, the different part of my brain is activated. I'm memorizing almost every word. And so it's difficult. Even with Elaine, I'll talk to her often. I try my best to look at her while I'm talking, but I end up going, it's not because I'm making up lies. When I'm looking, I'm listening. But I'm trying to show respect. Does that mean if I accidentally interrupt or I don't listen, I'm disrespecting her? I don't think so, but I'm trying to do it for moral values. Yeah.
If you do not show respect, are you being immoral?
If I do not show respect, am I being immoral? That's a great question. I would say that depends on the situation. That is, in general, I don't think it means you're being immoral. I think if you had to choose between being disrespectful or being respectful, and you chose disrespect, that is immoral. So if
How about to a criminal?
How about to a criminal?
Would you respect one or show them respect?
Would I show respect to a criminal? I would show respect to a criminal. And I will tell you later on, I will do that because I'm a Christian. I'm convinced that respect is one of the ways we can manifest or demonstrate love. Yes. But that's a great question. Later on, when I get to virtue ethics, and that's deontological, which I'll talk about. The virtue ethics, I would say, I show respect not because of who they are. I show respect because of who I am. I'm a respectful person. I try my best. And I'm convinced, I've been really processing and thinking and praying a lot about this last year or two of my life. I'm trying my best to think about how and what way God is developing my character. Because I'm convinced that's what He's trying to do. And I want to have a character that is respectful. So if you are cussing me out and talking about my mama and slapping me, I want to be the kind of person who treats you exactly like I would treat my best friend, because that's who I am. And so the answer is I would try my best to be respectful.
I was just going to
Try
say
my best.
how I would treat someone would be also hopefully how I would wish they would treat me. So
Yeah.
kind of
So how you treat someone is how you wish they would treat you. Yeah, Matthew
doesn't
7:12.
always turn that way, but you can hope.
Yeah. And that's a moral rule that we'll talk about. And that's a good rule. Yeah.
But for us as Christians, whether it's a known criminal or anyone else, they are made in God's image, and God loves them, whether they know God or not. And so for us to disrespect them is to disrespect God.
Gotcha. So humans are made in the image of God regardless of their background. So if we disrespect them, it's to disrespect God. Yeah, I'm with you on all the first part. I'm not sure if I disrespect them, it means to disrespect God, because that would mean I have the same moral obligations toward God as I do to people. And I don't. I don't think so, because, for example, I have the moral obligation to worship God, but not you. I have the moral obligation and honor down the road. But I do think we have the moral obligation to respect God. I'm not so sure that my respecting you funnels through. I think it demonstrates my love and respect for God to obey His commandments, which means, if that makes sense, and I'm not trying to be
No, but that's
extra
what I
picky,
was
but
getting at.
yeah. That's right. So they're a human. Back to the moral issues, right? That fourth one was it applies to humans. Humans are not a means to an end. That's, by the way, and I can go on for a long time. Humans, most ethicists will say humans have intrinsic value. What that means is they are not a means to an end. The main reason why most philosophers are so disgusted that the Nazis experimented on people, particularly twins, with no anesthesia, without, for all that time, is because, not just because they hurt and they were painful, because they experimented on humans to learn things, and you don't experiment on humans to do things. And that's because, as moral philosophers have said forever, you don't do that with humans. We're different from animals. The reason why most philosophers and most people don't have a problem, we can experiment on rats all day long. They're not humans. The real problem comes in when the animal is more developed and we start making different properties. So is it okay to experiment on a worm? Most people say sure. Chicken? Yeah. Rat? Whatever. What about dogs? Uh-oh. Cats? Yeah, that's fine. Dogs. What about chimpanzees? Monkeys, gorillas, right? You get higher primates and the cerebral cortex is different. And then that's why it gets overwhelmingly touchy, and how now we call the animals humanely treated. Humanely. Human, like a human. So that's a different issue. Now, as Christianity, I don't think they're human. I don't think they're closer to human. We're in the image of God. They're not. But nevertheless, back to the Nazi thing, the reason why it's atrocious they did that is not just that they hurt, but that they used humans at an end, and they're not. They're an end of themselves. So we would treat them with respect because we value them just because they're human. And that's part of my point of the sermon, and most Christian philosophers would say, on atheism, there is no reason to value them as that is, as humans. They come back and say, well, of course, because humans are different. Well, they're different. Well, they're more developed. Why is more developed equal we treat them differently? That's an arbitrary distinction. That it is outside of God's commandments, it seems to me, there is no reason to treat humans as anything superior. I'm going to talk about later on. That's speciesism. It just picks my species arbitrarily out of everything else. Why pick mine as the extra special one? Why not experiment all day long? I mean, what difference would that make at all? Then we'll talk more about that. But sorry, I don't mean to get too far off. Any questions or comments about metaethics? You're hanging in there? Teachers say this, there really aren't dumb questions. I had a teacher one time say, if there are no stupid questions, what do stupid people ask? We're all like, no, there really are not. Please don't ever be afraid to ask questions or stupid questions. Really please don't be afraid to ask. I'd be happy to help anyone I can.
Now if I were stupid if I asked them.
Now if I'm really stupid, that's right. Yeah, please don't. And I don't always have the answers, but I'll try. Move ahead. All right, number 2. How do we learn what is good? This is called moral epistemology. Epistemology from the Greek word for knowledge or knowing. The study of knowing. How do we learn what is good? How do we learn it? This is real simple. I mean, it's a big topic. I'm going to give you down in one sentence. I'm going to make it real simple because what I find most compelling. We are either taught moral values or we discover them. We either taught it or we caught it. Period. It's taught or caught. Taught, you can say discover, or a word I'm going to use often because it's a little more technical. That is, you can apprehend. We apprehend moral values. 1, 2. And a great analogy to either being taught it or caught it is math. All you math nerds, yay! But if you're not a math nerd, it's the same thing. I'm either taught 2 + 2 = 4, as I was, or I reflect on it and apprehend it does equal 4. A squared plus b squared does equal c squared. Can we remember your Pythagorean theorem? Thank you. That's right, good. So I'm either taught it or it's apprehended. David, that means it's relative. If I'm taught it, that means it's just a person. That's silly. No one. I used to tell my students this. People who, because of course students love to be relativistic. I would say, please, in your very next period you have math. Go when the teacher, and you look around the room, there's different answers on the quiz, and you go, see? This is exactly why we all know math is relative. It's all subjective. And then she goes, no, who do you think you are? You taught us this stuff. Since you taught it, it means there's nothing about this objective. Mine's just as true as yours, teacher. You put an F, you're just being mean. Well, that's silly. I mean, it's just silly. We learn more about math, not we, I don't, I'm not a mathematician the least bit. But mathematicians and humans learn more about mathematics as time goes on. Pure abstract mathematicians sit around and think about math all the time. And they go, did you know, we just discovered something. If you put this, x squared, blah, blah, next day, here's another one, write a paper. And they keep discovering more. They're not making it up, they are discovering it like you discover a planet. It's objective, it's out there. They go, did you know? No, we didn't know. Well, let me teach you. That doesn't make it relative, it means you go, now I see it. And then other brilliant mathematicians go, you're right. It was there all along and I couldn't figure it out. Well, how do we learn what is good? This moral epistemology, we either taught it, or we apprehend it, or we discover it. Taught or caught. I'll move on. Anything else? So anytime anybody ever says, well, you think that's good, you Christians think that's good, of course you think that, that's because you grew up there and your parents taught you. That's moral epistemology. They taught you. You get that from evolution. That's epistemology. We'll talk more about that in a second. Well, if I say it's apprehended, it's caught, how do we do that? I'll let that for a second. How do we do that? So how do we apprehend, or how do we catch morality? How do we discover and so forth? Well, first off, some deny it. There are theories that absolutely deny that we can apprehend morality. And there's all kinds of titles for these kinds of belief systems. They really do. They'll say you cannot apprehend morality. You don't discover it. You might teach it. That's just because your culture makes junk up, like social etiquette. But it's not real. You don't discover it. It's just something advanced primates pass down over time. But that's all it is. Let me say very quickly about this to make this very clear. I find this view abhorrent. I think it's horrible. I think it's disgusting. I think it's wrong. I think when things are wrong, they're wrong. I think it's wrong to rape. And if you think that there's no such thing as we can't apprehend that it is wrong, I think there's something wrong with you. In other words, I think it's so primal in my sensibilities that if you disagree, something's wrong with you. And that's what almost every single counselor or psychologist is going to say too. In fact, we have two different disorders that refer to a person who either doesn't apprehend morality or doesn't have any sense of compunction or guilt when they do it, and therefore see no consequence. The less of the evils is called antisocial personality disorder. Sociopathy is the nickname. A sociopath is the nickname. Antisocial personality. But the worst version is psychopathy, a psychopath. One man who goes here who was a licensed counselor, and we've talked all kinds of stories. And he's talked about some psychopaths he counseled back in California. And it's abhorrent. They have real disorders. There's something sick with them. And so the view that we cannot apprehend or discover it is both abhorrent, because I think things really are wrong when they're wrong. It's wrong to torture babies. That's wrong. If you, well, you can't apprehend. There's something wrong with you if you don't think that's wrong. That's my view. Two, every psychologist I ever know of and read about is going to disagree with you and say, if you can't apprehend, you need to come see me. You need a psych ward, because you are a danger to society. What in the world would stop you going murdering someone and torturing babies for fun, or raping whatever? What would stop you doing that? That doesn't mean they would go do it if they have this view, but what would stop them? So I find this repulsive. That's my view. Letter B, moral emotions versus or moral thought. Some say we have things called moral emotions. They reflect upon that. So if I feel guilt, they'll say that's an emotional state that I'm in. And I think that's partly true. But some will say that's how you apprehend morality. It's in your feelings. I don't think it's only in feelings. I think feelings are a part of it. I think they're affected. But I think it's the main thing. Some say no moral value judgments. You apprehend it just through your thinking. It's just rational. I think thoughts are part of it. I don't think it's the main thing. I think it involves our emotions. I think it involves our thoughts. But I don't think it's the same thing. You might disagree and you read the literature. I think it's letter C. And a lot of Christian philosophers concur. Instead, we apprehend morality what we call intuition. We apprehend morality by our intuition. And I'm going to read this quote from Craig, because this is a great quote. While philosophers differ over a precise definition of intuitions, a common usage defines an intuition as an immediate, direct awareness or acquaintance with something. Immediate, direct awareness or acquaintance with something. An intuition is a mode of awareness, sensory, intellectual, or otherwise, in which something seems or appears to be directly present to one's consciousness. Directly present to one's consciousness. For example, one can have a sensory intuition of a table, or an intellectual intuition of a conceptual truth, like 2 + 2 = 4. That's just an intuitive sense. It makes sense to me. I just get it. It's immediate. Intuitions are not infallible. You can be wrong, but they are prima facie justified on the face of it. In general, they're justified. That is, if one carefully reflects on something and a certain viewpoint intuitively seems to be true, then one is justified in believing that viewpoint in the absence of overriding counter-arguments, which are going to ultimately rely on alternative intuitions. So if I feel intuitively it's true, I'm justified for having an intuitive belief, a thought and feeling, the intuitive cognitive belief, until someone proves otherwise. For example, I ask you, were you here 5 minutes ago? Most of you are going to say?
Yes.
I'll say, prove it.
My chair is hot.
I'm back to tape.
Well, then this is where I can just go back, yeah, my chair is hot. I can go back over and over and I can say, well, you think it's hot, but that doesn't mean it proves there. It could be spontaneously hot. Or you could make up a so store all that. Well, this is a common thing is there's no way to prove it. There's no way to demonstrate it existed. You can demonstrate some exists now, but not 5 minutes ago. We could be, your brains, all of us, none of us could exist. I could be a solipsist and believe none of y'all are real. I'm talking to myself. I'm the only person who exists. I could be a brain in an alien ship or a laboratory. They've got all these probes in our brain, and I think you're real, but you're not. How do I prove that? And we say, well, I see things. Well, that's brain waves, right? Or you think that they would argue that. Or I perceive standing. Well, of course you do. Your brain, they can make you feel all that stuff. How would you prove it and demonstrate it? And so you have the past, you've got objects, how do I feel objects, and on it goes. There's a lot of things we take for granted based on intuition. And that's just the way it has to be. And so if you distrust moral intuitions, this is the key. If you say, poo-poo on that, there's no such thing as moral intuitions, my next question would be so that means I can't trust any other intuitions, right? At all? That to me seems to be demonstrably false. Because I'll turn around and say, prove to me 5 minutes ago or 100 years ago. Well, those books, the books don't prove it happened. They could have lied about that, and on it goes. There's no way. So we just have intuitive belief. So David, how do you apprehend that rape is wrong? I just stinking know it. I just know it. I just know it. I don't have to go to a laboratory. I don't have to read a book for it. I just know it. My intuition tells me it's just wrong. Why do you think it's wrong to steal? So if someone cuts me off in the traffic, or they get in front of the line in front of the cider fest or whatever, and I go, something instantly goes, ugh. Davis, because all these years of evolution, I'll tell you that's nonsense. But something tells me immediately what they did is wrong. Not just social convention, but it's wrong to do that. It's wrong to steal. When my dog does it, I'll go, ugh. Oh, you do it. Or if I did it to you. C.S. Lewis gives an example. If he's on the bus system. Let's say you're on a train or something, and someone you've tripped over someone's foot. I'm tripping over David's foot here. It's a size 12 or 10, 11, 12, 13. 13. Say 13. Yeah. I trip over those 13s, and I go, oh, and look at you. I'm sorry. It's an accident. I'm not mad at all. He didn't violate any kind of moral law. But if I do it for a second, that calls, let's say I do it again, but he trips me on purpose, and the same amount of pain and suffering comes out of it. See, I break my arm and broke both examples. The first example, nothing wrong has been done. The second example, something very wrong has been done. It's not fair. It's unjust that he did that to me. So one, he should repent. The other one, he should not. So they're very different concepts. Now, how do I know that? I know it immediately. I can just instinctively know the difference based on motivation. It's an intuitive sense. And I think we all know it. And everyone assumes it. I used to tell my students, next time you go to Burger King or something, I said, what do you do when you go there to say there's several people? What do you form? They go, well, I line. I go, what do you do? They go, I stand in line. Why do you stand in line? There's always a pause for a while. I go, why do you do that? Did they give you a contract when you walked in that told you what to do? No. Is it on the wall? Is there something on the wall that says the way this works is you stand in line? No. Is it on the glass when you walk in the door? No. Did your parents say that here's the deal, you can't get food? No. How did you know that? That's social contract theory. You just know the right thing to do, and social etiquette is get in line because it'd be unfair if you got in front of someone else. Yeah?
Watching Eleanor and Naomi grow up, I don't know that it's necessarily, if some things are necessarily intuitive, but there's a lot more teaching and modeling
Yes.
as well, because seeing them play and it's a total accidental push and one falls down, even though they don't get hurt, well, they think it is wrong.
That's right.
And they come and let us know it
That's
is
right.
wrong. And retaliate.
So even if you're a child, just repeat for the people who can't hear well the video. Yeah, if your daughters, if one falls, even if it's an accident, the other kid wants to go, usually enact vengeance. Because kids usually assume poor motives on the other person. Or two, they just want to act out their pain by being even. You made me suffer, you're going to suffer too. That's right. So back to your point is, it seems like children don't intuit it as much, but they have to be taught it. Absolutely. Almost, I don't know of any moral philosopher who not would concur with you. Certainly I concur with you.
And so then
That it's primarily taught when we're younger.
So then where do you split then? Where's the line whether things are intuitive or you've been taught somewhere along the line, maybe you don't really recall that teaching, so you feel it's intuitive, but there's teaching instead.
The great question, so where's the line? Not to be smarky, I don't think there is a line. I think some kids intuit it, some have to be taught, depending on the ethical issue. I think some adults have to be taught it, and sometimes can't intuit it. But I have, just like mathematics, I have no problem believing that for millennia before me, humans have been discovering more and more and more of the moral law that they now teach to me. I have no problem arguing and saying, yep, that's right. And then as I get older, discover, and then start intuiting, I go, no, they're right, I see that. And one way I can tell a difference, and it's not always a clear cut, but usually it is. I mean, I can tell the difference between what someone taught me when I go, that's wrong. What they taught was wrong. That's not a value. This happens often in counseling when people had abusive relationships with their parents were abusers, or they were manipulative, or they were horrible people, and they grew up and they told them, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're this, or you should go steal or lie for mom and daddy. And they grew up, they've been taught it all their lives. And then they grow up and go, it's wrong to steal. And I've heard people say that who never went to church, who never taught that at all. There's something about them tells them. So I would just say it just is both, depending on the age. For a long time, the second thing I'd say is, for a long time, thinkers have said, in general, there comes a time when a person switches and they start owning that moral value and say, I get it now. And typically, as you probably heard, they often call that the age of accountability. And in different cultures, that's different. But in general, most people put that on their teenage years. 12, 13, 14 years old, and they go, no, they get this now. They're not just, don't do this till they realize, no, I get it. That is, even if no one were watching, even if I don't get punished, it's still wrong. It's wrong to rape, it's wrong to murder. What if no one taught me that? They would say. So that just depends on the person and their moral intuition. Having said that again, the third thing is, another reason why it depends on the person is some people, as I would argue many people do, their moral compass is just screwed up. And as a Christian, I would suggest that as people who sin, we don't have perfect awareness of it. Mixed with that, I think a biochemical mix, you have people who are psychopaths and sociopaths, they might not ever intuit it. And they might have been taught it their entire lives and they still go, I don't feel it at all, I don't care. So I guess it would depend. I meet those kids, you think, man, what is wrong? They kind of be not your kids. I've met kids, they just got to be taught, and you meet these other kids just from early on, they just seem to get it. Like, no, that's not right. They just seem to have a moral maturity about them. And I mean adults, who just don't seem to have caught it just yet. And they need a lot more help. They need maybe a prison to help them. But that's the best I got. So the key there is to make sure the epistemology is how do they learn it. Just because we discover how they learn it doesn't mean it's not some universal principle. Just because we discover how they learn it doesn't mean it's not a universal principle. That makes it moral. Again, I can discover, how did you learn 2 plus 2 equals 4? Oh, my math teacher taught me when I was in kindergarten. 2 plus 2 doesn't equals 4. It's subjective. It's whatever you want it to be. Why? Because your teacher taught you. That doesn't make any, that does not logically follow. I was taught it because it is true. And what's happened in the last 30, 40 years is relativism has taken over, is what used to be always considered the moral law as objective as mathematics and theorems and abstract. Now it's shifted over to this. I like chocolate ice cream. I like to save people from fires. I don't like asparagus. I don't like rape. They're all in the same category. They're just preferences on the inside. They're emotivism. And in many, many, many cultures in America, that's a chief battle that the church faces when it comes to thinking clearly. Most Christians, for most of time, have never been emotives. They've always been cognitivists, they've always been realists. And they have assumed morality. And so when we say things like, that is not good, we really think we're saying something about reality and whether we're taught or not. Good. Anything else about that? So some deny it. I think intuition is the best way. Number 4, why be good? Because Daddy told me. Because Santa Claus. Well, whatever. The answer, I'm going to give you a real short answer. The answer depends on which prescriptive ethics system you assert. That's later on in Roman numeral 7 and 8, particularly 8. So that depends. That's back to what you were saying. Why be good, or what's in this? What is the good, and why be good? That depends on that. And I'll talk a lot more there. What is good? This is called moral semantics. Semantics is what is good. This is for me, very difficult. I have wrestled a lot with this issue. In fact, I even emailed William Lane Craig, who's a world-renowned Christian philosopher, on this issue. He hasn't gotten back to me yet. But I emailed this exact issue. He has a question of the week, and I submitted it as a Q&A. I haven't done that yet. This is my first one, and on this very issue. I was hoping he'd get back to me before this study, but he hasn't yet. So if he responds, I'll let you know what he says. But in general, we'll say this. I don't know if I want to go that deep with it. Descriptive versus, I have that on your handout, descriptive versus foundational. When people talk about moral semantics, there's a what versus the why. Semantic theories are theories about what words mean. What do they mean? What does dog mean? What does cat mean? What does a sweater mean? What does everything? What does human mean? Descriptive moral semantic theories, they talk about what they mean, like good, better, right, must, ought. What do those words mean? foundational semantic theories, or theories about why words mean what they do. Or more specifically about what makes it the case that the words mean what they do. Why are they defined that way? And that's all I'm going to say about that. But those are two very different ways when moral philosophers talk about semantics. When I say, what does good mean? They'll say, what does it mean? Or why is it used that way? Why does it mean what it does mean? Those are two different concepts. I'm not going to talk much about that, but I want you to introduce. That's the two big fields of semantics. You can go to your heart's desire. It's this next thing. Values versus duties. This is something that I do understand. It's the what is good. I'm going to end on that and say I don't know, but the values versus duties. Because this one I do get, and this is very important. This is a very important point. And you'll get this, there is a distinction, and that we should keep clear as Christians and as philosophers, we keep this clear. A value and a duty. These are different things. Different things. Values concern the moral worth of something. The moral worth. Whether it's good or bad. So, for example, give me something, I've already given you a few. Give me an example of a value, a moral value. Come on, talk for a second.
Human life.
Honesty.
Honesty is a moral value. What'd you say?
Human life.
Yeah, and to use the typical way, they would say the preservation of human life is a moral value. And later on, I'm going to tell you, in most philosophical circles, that's the top one. That's the biggie. That's right. So whatever else? What about shaking hands?
Manners, I was going to say manners, right?
Well, see, manners is the etiquette way of saying manners shows respect, typically.
Okay.
I mean, wouldn't you agree? It typically shows a way of respect. So, for example,
Well, I'm saying good family values.
yeah, and that's a form of values. We're just trying to think of specific ones. I was having lunch a few months ago with a non-Christian who's from China, and we went to one of his favorite restaurants in town. Of course, it's Chinese. It's an authentic one. And as we're eating the soup, of course, you know what I'm doing as I'm eating the spoon. I'm being as quiet as I can. And you know what he's doing, right? You may as loud as he can, of course, and I start giggling. And I leaned over and I said, it's amazing how the social etiquette is different. And he starts laughing and goes, I know, sorry, I know we do it to demonstrate we like it. And I said, I know that's why you do it. And I thought, that's the difference. We both have the value of showing respect toward it. And I'm going to say, I liked the soup. I appreciated the soup. And I'll go, ooh. See, in American culture, I was taught you grunt, that's really good. That's how I show it. But in Asian China, you slurp. The moral value is showing respect. We're thanking the person, and we're honoring the fact that the soup's good. The moral value, that's something of moral worth. That's back to etiquette. It's not a radically different way of moral values, which is expressing different. Moral duty is different. Okay, so one more time. A moral value is the moral worth of something, whether it's good or bad. Duties concern what is something is obligatory for us. So moral worth, think this, good, bad. Moral duties are different. That's what is obligatory. That is to say, what are we supposed to do? In that term, we use the word right or wrong. Right or wrong. Get out of the way here. A value, think good or bad. Is it good or bad to lie?
Bad.
Bad.
Depends. In general, that's right, it does depend. Well, so you're a deontologist. We'll go through a little bit, situational ethics. In general, most people think lying is bad. That's a moral value. It's bad to lie. It's good to, what's the opposite?
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Honesty. And so be honest, tell the truth. That's a moral value. Then the question is, in the moment, should I lie? Sometimes I might lie to save a life. In that instance, what's my moral duty? Then we're saying, is it right or wrong to lie now? Ones are different. One is the value, one is the duty.
So it's okay to lie, it's a duty?
And later on, when we get to the different more ethical systems, I will make the argument that it is good to lie in certain circumstances, depending on the ethical system you go to.
What if someone says, how do I look in this outfit?
How do I look in this outfit? Yeah, it reminds me. That reminds me, in my second church job, I work at a Methodist church, And we were in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We were driving to I was at a Methodist, going to a Methodist conference in the front. The staff there were so funny. And I was the basic associate pastor and teacher, you might say. And then the pastor, or the adult discipleship youth pastor, were in the front seat. And the senior pastor was a guy and she was a girl. Good sense of humor, we were laughing and whatnot, and I was recently married. So Ghislaine had been married, we're still early on, year 2 or 3. And we were talking about weight. And of course, the woman at the time, she didn't like how much she weighed, whatever. They were kind of talking about it, and I think maybe her husband had made a joke or said something about the dress, whatever, kind of hurt her feelings. We were laughing about it. And they were going back and forth, and he was like, oh, I would never say, man, blah, blah. We were just making jokes. And then I said, you know, can you imagine this pontification? I was thinking about my marriage. I was thinking early on, I thought, because Elaine's already asked me that a couple times, or early on, I thought, do I want to spend the rest of my marriage lying when she asked me that question? Or do I tell her the truth? And I couldn't finish my sentence. And they looked at each other in the front seat and went, you lie. And we laughed for a long time. And I said, and I laughed. And when I calmed down, I said, well, I chose the other. That I chose I'm not going to lie. And to finish my sentence, what I was going to say was, either I lie or I tell her the truth and then try to disabuse her of the idea that her value is found in her weight. If we could change that, then I can always tell the truth and won't hurt feelings. But I'm going to be the person who always tell the truth. And I am. To this, that reminds me, it is funny.
It's a big one.
It's a big one. So the answer is, that depends on the person. I personally do not ever lie. Ever, ever, ever lie. If you ask me, I'm going to tell you the truth. Doesn't mean I'm mean about it. Just mean I never lie. I do not ever lie. Because I'll tell it on, because of character formation. I'd rather keep my mouth shut if I think a person will want to hear it, but I don't ever lie for that reason. So if someone asks you, some people say, no, David, it's better to lie because you want to help the moral value of respecting them or honor, or what they'll make up some. And I'll talk about those theories later on, but I'm just kidding.
Between moral value and moral duty.
Yes.
So if you want to take, and I'm just thinking of parents because we all have. So is it a moral value or a moral duty to take care of your parents when they get older or they need help?
Good. Is it a moral value or is it a moral duty to take care of your parents when they need help? That's a moral duty.
But what if you really value how much they helped you all of your life?
How much do you value? What if you value how much you don't know why?
What's value and what's duty in a situation like that?
Good question. How do you distinguish between a value and duty?
In the Bible that you just preached. It was like, honor your father and your mother. So even if they've just been, and this might have not, by the way, but if they have just been terrible to you all your life, and it comes to the end and they need help, do you do it because of value, because of what you know is right, or do you do it out of duty because you feel obligated?
It can be both, right?
Good question. So I'm repeating this so people hear it. If the end of your life, your parents have been awful your entire life, but then, and the Ten Commandments is to honor your father and mother, should we take care of them just because we're ought to, or for some value? Again, that depends on the ethical system that you put into place, and later on we'll talk about that. And then how you distinguish it. So, to give you a little foretaste, for those that argue that the moral duty commandment given by God becomes our duty, the people who said that now has become a rule for us, and therefore we must follow it, they're called deontologists. They would say, you follow it, because now his moral commandment has become your duty, which now is a rule, and you've got to do it. You've got to follow the rules. Others make different arguments. A virtue ethicist would say, does it help you form into the kind of character you're trying to be formed into? If it does help you form the character, you need to do that. You need to follow that duty. And then different people, consequentialists would say, is it better for your parents and or better for society that you do it? Utilitarian is, does it bring good on the other side of it, a consequentialist ethic? And they would say, you could do yes because that would help the benefit, or no, you don't, because if they're murderers and their death would help society, you don't help them because of the consequence. So it depends on the three major different ways of ethical systems. And we'll explore all three of those. So I don't want to give you exactly what I think I would do, if that's okay yet. I'll wait for if you'll ever come back. The second thing I'd say is, how do you distinguish between a value and a duty? Values, and this is very important, and these are very good questions. I mean this. That's why I wrote the word moral up here afterwards. It's a moral value, not a value. For example, you said, because maybe I really value how much they did for me. That means you cherish it, you appreciate it, you value in that sense. That is not the same as a moral value. It's not. And I'll prove it to you. If I gave a diamond that's a 5-pound diamond into the hands of a starving African kid in the jungle, how valuable is that diamond to that? Doesn't mean a thing. He can't eat it. He or she can't do junk with it. It is not valuable. Valuable, in that sense, is purely subjective. My dollar bill means something to me because it's assumed in the currency in the culture. But it doesn't mean something. It's a piece of cloth or paper cloth, whatever. So value in that sense is purely subjective. I value movies, but you don't have to value movies. Moral values are different. That's back to that first thing of the 4 categories. A moral value is a fact, I would argue, a fact about a statement. It is something that demonstrates moral worth of a value to which it's universally applied, it's above all laws and customs, it's applied to humans and so forth. So the moral values are things like justice, honesty, the preservation of human life, fairness, and I have a long list I'll give you later as well. Those are moral values. Respect. So if you said, I want to show that I have the moral value of respect, I want to be a respectful person, I respect my parents. How do I show them that? I might say, I will help them at the end of their life. At the end of their life, not in their life. Help them at the end of their life. Those are different things. But if you're a deontologist, which we'll talk about later, you don't need to have a moral value for why you do it. You just need a commandment or a rule. You just follow the rules. And I'll argue later on, in parenting, virtually all parenting for childhood to a certain age is rule-based. And I argue all the time when I do parenting classes, it should be. Do not go in the street. Why, Dad? Well, I'll do it. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if I can explain it to you. Don't do it. Period. What happens, of course, is they grow up to an age and don't get past that. And they go to church the rest of their lives and think Christianity is just about a bunch of rules, arbitrary rules. And ideally, as they get older, we're supposed to teach them, here's the moral principle behind it, or some other safety feature. Preservation of your own human life, whatever it is. So do you have to do it? That depends on the moral compulsion. Well, I will tell you my view. My view is that in that particular scenario, if parents have been horrible the whole life and all of a sudden they need you, I would apply actually what I said in the sermon, which is when you can help, you do it. When you can help, you do it. I don't think we have the moral obligation to put ourselves in harm's way to destruct our own lives so that we help others. That, to me, is not at all a biblical concept, ever, at no point. In fact, for example, giving money. The Apostle Paul says explicitly to the Corinthians, I'm paraphrasing, don't get poor by giving money to the poor. Don't lose all you have. We don't put ourselves in harm's way. And people who have boundary problems and by nature are rescuers, they do this all the time. So they'll sell their land, sell their house, or everything just to help someone else. I helped a woman one time in a previous church who had no money. She had help from the church because she gave it away so much. There were good reasons, but I kept saying, you got to stop. I just want to help. I'm glad you do. But now you can't pay your own bills. You have a power bill. You have kids to take care of. And that's how it is, in my view, with any kind of moral obligation that we have. And because I'm a Christian in virtue, ethics, and character development, I would think that the moral thing to do is not to withhold help from your parents because they were bad all their lives. Because in that sense, I'm punishing them.
I was looking at the good and the bad and the right and the wrong. So to me, they're kind of the same.
They're very similar, but they're different. They are, and that's why I'm glad you brought this up. They're different.
Okay.
They're different. So the issue is, what's the right thing for me to do in this circumstance versus what is the value, the moral value at the time that I'm trying to uphold. And again, unfortunately, because this is like on a ball of yarn, later on I'm going to unpack this even more and we'll see the difference.
So are you saying that morals are on a sliding scale?
Are morals on a sliding scale?
Well, depending on what the situation is.
The answer is yes, and we'll talk about this later. They're called the weight of rules, not of values. They're the weight of rules. They weigh different things. They weigh different amounts. Yes, the answer is yes. Most philosophers and Christian philosophers believe that moral rules have different weights or different levels of obligatoriness. I'm more obligated to preserve human life than I am to tell the truth. I would argue that. Most people do. And so there's a scale. In that sense, if you want to see the scale, yeah. They're still valuable. They're still moral values. But their consequence and their weight is different.
If you see God as being the one in control, then it shouldn't matter if you tell the truth, because He will see that it comes out the way He wants.
Say it one more time. If God is in control, say it one more time, because I'll repeat it for the camera.
You should always tell the truth.
You should always tell the truth.
Because He will make it come out the way He wants.
Because He will make it come out the way He wants.
So there shouldn't be a sliding scale on that morality.
Gotcha. And that's exactly what deontologists would say.
Is that
You
good or
follow
bad?
the rules. You follow the truth. What?
Is that good or bad?
Is that good or bad? That depends on which ethical system you're in. That's right. Depends on. That's right. That's right. Depends on.
Notice he's not answering.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what this changed my life, because now I see. Yeah. I do very much. I've already told you. I'm a realist. I think moral values are absolutely right and true. When it comes to the moral duties that we have, that's where those ethical systems come to play. And biblically, I'm going to talk about this later on, so stay with me. The different duties, utilitarianism, rule-based, virtue-based, character-based, consequent, all these are in the Bible. All three major systems are in the biblical text, Old and New Testament. And we'll explore some of those in the biblical text. And so, I quite frankly, well, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you now, I'll tell you a lot. I think virtue ethics is the most Christian of them. And I'll make an argument for that. Good, so moral values, moral duties. We'll come back and we're going to stop here. We'll come back there. I was going to end on this and say, I don't have a letter here because I didn't put one. What is good? I didn't answer the question. What is good? And that's what I asked Bill Craig to help me more, because it seems to me that I've heard definitions, but they're hard, they're all problematic. What Bill Craig says, and I think some other ethicists say as well, is that goodness is, he calls it, a primitive, foundational, ultimately undefinable property. That is, you can't define it. And I think I find that compelling, but I have a problem with that, and I told him my question, if you want to know. But my question is because if you say good doesn't have it's a foundational brute fact kind of a thing, that we all know what it means, but you can't define it that way, and he gives some analogies that I don't find compelling. But if it's true, then I don't know what to do with certain biblical texts. Jesus says in Mark 10 that he says, don't call him, why do you call me good? Only God is good. So if good is undefinable and ultimately undefinable, I don't know what Jesus means by that. The psalmists say on more than one occasion, God is good. One I told Craig, I quoted for him, this is God, you are good and you do good. Well, if it's ineffable, then I don't know what that means, because it ends up being a tautology. Anyway, find what actually the word good means. You can say, well, it's what's good for humans. Well, that's but one is then you have all kinds of definitions, and all of them become problematic. All of them end up being arbitrary. All of them do. What's the guy's name? And Jason might be able to help me here. What's the guy? Letter to a Christian Nation. He's an atheist.
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris. I always want to say Michael Shermer. Sam Harris, he says the good is defined by that which helps human flourishing. Conscious beings, sentient beings. Well, and Craig takes him to task on that, and he should, because that makes no sense. That means if you're not sentient, we have no moral obligation to that. But that doesn't make any sense. I mean, coma victims shouldn't be murdered on the spot and all that. So, but the point is, when you start defining it by certain traits, properties, it becomes real problematic. And I'm going to stop on that. Yes, sir.
I see good as that which is in total agreement with God's nature.
I said good as that which is
Total agreement.
total agreement with God's nature. I have historically had the same definition. I would say that which comports to the character of God or the nature of God. And that's historically how I defined it. Craig says, don't do it that way. He explicitly says, don't do it that way. And that's my question, why not? If the answer, if he's going to say because it creates a tautology, and logic tautology is a self-evident thing, that it doesn't explain it, you're just saying it a different way. You're just saying it a different way. It's like saying, I'm an unmarried bachelor, or I'm a bachelor who's not married. That's what it means to you. It's a tautology. So if you say good is that which conforms to God's nature, when Jesus says only God is good alone, that's like saying only God is what God does. Only God is who God is. That's a tautology. I am who I am. That's a tautology. So that's problematic in the application of that definition. But I like it the most. I just don't know through those Bible verses if that's the definition. So when the psalmist says, God, you are good, if good means that which comports to your character, that's just like saying, God, you are that which comports to your character. You are you. That's a tautology. Now, what I was, I'm sorry, you may not care, but what I have historically said, John, to that is I agree. My response to me would be, if it's a tautology, is that's okay, because for two reasons. One is it's similar, very similar, I would argue, to the concept of holiness. Most Old Testament specialists and linguists will argue that the Hebrew word, kadosh, means having to do with God's reality, God's domain, God's character, in that sense. Something that's holy means it's from his realm. But the Bible all the time says God is holy. So it's like saying God is of God's realm. But the reason why that's okay, this is my second point, I think, is because when it's used, it's being used to distinguish God from creatures. So it's kind of like saying, when you say God is holy, I think, it's kind of like saying, God, you are you, which means you're not like me. We are very different. And how do I say that? You're different from us. I got a word for that, holy. And so a pot can be holy, a spoon can be holy, it's of the divine realm. It's not like me, it's not of me. I think in a similar concept, goodness could be in a similar kind of category. That saying if God is good, if it's of God's character, it means it's of God's character and not mine. But I might be wrong.
It seems to me your signs will be like Jesus. That
Yes.
that's being applying. That's an application of good.
Right. The signs that I put out, well, I don't put out, but I designed that said, thank you for coming, see you next week, go be like Jesus. That's an applied good. Yeah. And every time we have a commandment, I said, go be like Jesus. And in English, that's the imperatival mood, right? That means I'm commanding it. Go be like Jesus. Clean up your room. It's a commandment. And that sign, I'm demanding, I would say the New Testament is, go be like Jesus. I'm saying it's a moral duty, go to be like Jesus. It's the right thing to do to go be like Jesus. Why would he say that? Because I believe there's tons of values to which that we gain by being like Jesus.
Plus, not only what we gain, but we talked about giving people respect. It's
Right.
a way of respecting God.
Yeah, it's a way of respecting God.
That's one aspect of it.
That's one aspect. I agree with you. I agree. So parents, when you wrap up, when you teach your kids, don't do that. Try your best to think about it. They go and they say, why? Instead of saying, because I said so, think for a second. Why is it good not to do that? Or why is it bad to do that? And see if you can bring into it because you're violating a moral value. And what if they don't have to do it that way, social etiquette, but can express that value in a different way? But if they can't, no, you just can't lie. You need to tell the truth. Why? Because I said so. No, because I'm trying to shape your character. And I want you to be an honest person. Because I think that is the goal of parenting, is to shape your character. And it'd be cool for us to get real good at using these moral values. I think that vocabulary. And we're not perfect at that. But we own that. I was disrespectful. I didn't tell the truth, and that was wrong. It was wrong. That's just your feeling. I'm just kidding. All right, let me say a prayer. Let me say a prayer that, Lord, help us think clearly about this, and help us, of course, more importantly, whether we remember this or understand it all or comprehend it, more importantly, help us live it. Help us live it. Help us be the people that when we make decisions at home, at work, out in the streets, we do the right thing. Help us with that. And when we fail, please, as Christians, be reminded that you have forgiven us on the cross. Holy Spirit, work inside us. Pick us back up again to try again. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Don't give up.